Paul was dragged onto an iron rail, and he immediately reached for his weapon, but his other hand was held down by Coffee. Another inmate saw this and shouted for help. Then Coffee reached for Paul's groin, and Paul was immobilized. Paul noticed that the light bulb above him was getting brighter, and with the sound of the bulb exploding, Coffee let go of him. The inmate continued to shout for help. Coffee sat on the edge of the bed and started coughing violently. Suddenly, countless flies flew out of his mouth, but they turned into ashes in the air. Paul didn't know what Coffee had done, but Coffee, sweating heavily, said he had cured Paul's illness and lay down on the bed exhausted. Paul went to the bathroom half believing and half doubting, and to his amazement, he found that his urethritis had been cured. His urine hadn't flowed so smoothly in a long time. Paul's wife made cornbread to thank Coffee for helping him. The red-haired inmate also wanted to eat, but Coffee refused to give him any, and the red-haired inmate started insulting Coffee. Paul stepped forward to shut the red-haired inmate up, but the red-haired inmate spat on Paul's face. Paul let him go for now, but the red-haired inmate went too far and urinated on another prison guard's feet. This guard wouldn't let him off easily and gave the red-haired inmate a surprise. There was an elderly inmate in the prison who had a smart mouse that listened to the old man and performed acrobatics for him. The old man liked the mouse, but a privileged second-generation inmate named Percy was cruel. Every time the mouse came out searching for food, Percy would try his best to get rid of it. The guards thought he was unreasonable, and some guards couldn't stand it and wanted to beat him up, but he threatened the guards that if they dared to lay a hand on him, he would make them lose their jobs. Paul told him not to be arrogant, and if he threatened everyone again, they would beat him together even if it meant losing their jobs. Percy's old problem recurred, and he scared the old man to the ground. Just as he was being arrogant and impudent, suddenly the red-haired inmate grabbed him by the throat. Besides kissing Percy, the red-haired inmate also touched him, and Percy wet himself on the spot. The old man mocked him for being a bully who was afraid of tough guys, and Percy cried sadly. From then on, Percy and the old man became enemies. One day, when the old man was playing with the mouse, the wheel accidentally rolled out, and the mouse followed it. Suddenly Percy stomped on the mouse. And seeing the dying mouse, Percy smirked and walked away satisfied, while the old man cried. Suddenly, Coffee reached out for the mouse, and Paul handed it to him. Coffee held the mouse and blew on it, and soon his palm began to glow. Suddenly, Coffee started coughing, and countless flies flew out of his mouth. The mouse miraculously came back to life, and everyone witnessed Coffee's incredible power. The old man was very grateful to Coffee, and the guards wanted to kick Percy out of the prison. Percy proposed that he be in charge of an execution, and he would willingly leave afterward. On a stormy day, on the day of the old man's execution, he sat on the electric chair, and Percy intentionally didn't wet the sponge. But when it was almost time for the execution, Paul noticed that there were no ripples in the bucket and no water stains on the floor. But it was too late. When the switch was pulled, the old man let out a painful scream, but it couldn't be stopped anymore. Coffee could feel the pain too, and everyone felt something was off. The old man emitted a burst of white smoke, and people wanted to escape from there. Even Percy turned his head in fear. Afterwards, some guards couldn't stand it and wanted to beat Percy, but Paul stopped them. Paul's boss's wife fell seriously ill and didn't have much time left. She had always been kind to everyone, so they didn't want her to suffer from the illness, and they decided to let Coffee try to help her. They captured Percy and locked him in a dark room, then quietly released Coffee. Just as they were about to leave, the red-haired inmate grabbed Coffee, and it seemed like Coffee sensed something. The guards trusted Coffee a lot and didn't put handcuffs on him. On their way, Coffee picked up a handful of grass and happily had the guards smell it. When they reached the boss's house, lights suddenly turned on, but at that moment, the boss aimed a gun at them. Coffee slowly approached, took the boss's gun, and walked into the room. He went up the stairs and saw a weary woman's face. Strong man approached the critically ill woman, and as he bent down, he sucked the illness out of her mouth and into his own. As a result, the clock shattered, and the house began to shake violently. The illness kept flying out of the woman's body, and Coffee absorbed it all into his own body. The woman gradually regained her strength, but Coffee started coughing violently. He didn't spit out the illness, and the woman had already forgotten the memories of her sickness. However, when she saw Coffee, she immediately stood up and walked toward him. She said she had seen him in her dreams, and he had brought light into her life. She gave him her necklace as a symbol of gratitude. The guards took Coffee back to the cell and then released Percy from the dark room. Just as Percy stepped out of solitary confinement, Coffee grabbed him and vomited all the illness into Percy's mouth. Percy, after absorbing it, looked dazed. Slowly, he walked to the red-haired inmate's cell, turned his head to face him, and the red-haired inmate insulted Percy. Percy suddenly shot at the red-haired inmate, and the guards quickly intervened to stop Percy. Afterwards, Percy vomited countless flies, leaving Paul confused about Coffee's actions. Coffee asked Paul to shake hands with him. It turned out that Coffee was not the killer. Red-haired was the culprit who killed the two girls. Coffee had actually wanted to save them, but he was mistaken for the murderer and arrested. Coffee could feel the pain of the world every day. Soon, it was Coffee's execution day, and Paul asked him what he wanted to do. He would do his best to fulfill his wishes because he didn't want to destroy an angel for the sake of his job. But Coffee was tired and didn't want to stay in this world with so much pain. Paul understood Coffee. Before leaving, Coffee wanted to watch a movie. As he watched a joyful musical film, Coffee smiled. Before his execution, Coffee remained calm. While the guards had solemn expressions, Coffee could sense the hatred from people towards him. but the guards didn't hate him. Some guards shed tears with sadness. During the execution, Coffee requested not to have a hood placed over his head because he was afraid of the darkness. Paul agreed. After Coffee was bound, Paul hesitated to give the order. He approached Coffee and bid him a final farewell, then tearfully gave the command.
On to.
An angel arrived in this world full of hope but left disappointed. Many years later, at the age of 108, Paul told this story to an old woman who didn't believe him. Paul took her to a small cabin on the mountain, where the cigar box contained the same mouse from years ago. The mouse was now 70 years old, and Coffee had passed on his abilities to him and the mouse. Paul had lived for a century, witnessing his loved ones and friends leaving one after another. Every late night, he would toss and turn unable to sleep. He didn't know how much longer he could live. After all, the mouse had lived until now.